So I'm just super humbled to be here to speak to y'all. I talk a lot, but every single time I get butterflies in my stomach because I want to make sure that the words are right and that the word is heard by the people that need to hear the word at the time given. So I hope I touched that vein tonight for some of y'all. Definitely, I want to encourage people, put it in the chat. You can also talk trash. I taught in Kensington for almost a decade, so not that much you can say to me can hurt my feelings. But I hope to speak truth here today about kind of what we can learn from the Black intellectual tradition, especially around literacy, but also what we can learn from the past and the structures that have existed. So I'm going to share my slide deck on the screen if you give me a second. Okay. So this is called Literacy as Liberation, Black Reading Traditions Then and Now. So again, I want to put another disclaimer just in case nobody got the word before, but I want to acknowledge that the views expressed here are my own and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the School District of Philadelphia. This presentation is grounded in scholarship, educational practice, and historical context. So just a brief thing, just so y'all know who you're dealing with. Gigi gave a great introduction, but I want to uplift the fact, this is my 15th year as a school district employee. My first 4 years were at Germantown High School until the Great Purge of 2013, where 23 schools got closed. 95% of those children going to those schools were Black and brown children. And then I was laid off. Following that, I found myself picked up at Kensington Kappa, and I was there for 8 years. I also side hustle at the University of Pennsylvania currently as an adjunct professor. I teach a K-8 social studies methods course and actually just finished my 4th year there and previously was at LaSalle University. I'm also a proud husband and father of 4 boys. There's my sons right there. And if you see the background, that is an outside a Black-owned bookstore in Phoenix, Arizona. And when we visited Phoenix, Arizona to visit a college for one of my sons, I was like, they have a Black bookstore in Phoenix, Arizona, and they did. So of course I had to get a picture with my boys. As you can see, they all range from 18 to the age of 10. Ishmael, Khalil, Ezekiel, and Malachi. And I'm also a proud husband of 19 years. I believe education is the practice of freedom. The more we get educated, the more we build community, the more we think, the more we build with one another. I think the closer we get to the idea or the concept in which we call freedom. And when I say freedom, I'm not talking about George Washington's freedom. I'm talking about Harriet Tubman's. And a fun fact, and people always are somewhat surprised by this, I graduated high school with a 1.6 GPA. And as we go through this presentation, I'm hoping to share some things with you to help you understand how basically reading saved my life and can actually be a catalyst to actually motivate folks to move forward and why it's so important for our children, not just in the city of Philadelphia, but across the world to get that experience. So before we get into it, like I said, these views don't represent the School District of Philadelphia. They represent my own. So I'm definitely going to hopefully say some things that might make people experience some discomfort. But I do want folks to understand that this should be a space where we're learning together, that we're talking with one another, and we're building with one another. So I'm going to give folks a second to kind of look over these norms. And if you want, you can put in the chat what number norm is really resonating with you, because these norms are meant to like have us think about it. And I do want to emphasize expect non-closure. I have about 40 minutes to break down a long history, a very up and down history, but also a history that is very rich and filled with things that we can learn from. And I'm hoping that we can tap on some of the ideas, but definitely this should only be viewed as the beginning of a conversation. So I'll give a second if folks want to drop in the chat. Any of these norms resonate with you? Thank you. We have people sharing. Yes. We got 5, we got 3, we got 4. Wonderful, wonderful. 3, 5, 5. Yes, I'm seeing like a pattern here. Understanding that growth comes from a place of discomfort, right? And we have to be real about that, not just talk about it, but be about it, right? A lot of people talk about being willing to be put in that position. But truth be told, I get uncomfortable in those positions at times. And in order to grow, we have to be able to really embrace that. And three, one to step up, one to step back, seek first to understand rather than judge. Thank you, everybody. So today's session is really going to be focusing on this idea of literacy as a historically uh, not only revolutionary piece, but also a violent relationship, right, between the history of what Black people have experienced within this society and when literacy has come. It has been used against folk, it has been used in a way to control people, it has also been used as a way to kind of navigate this society. It's also been viewed historically by Black people as a way to really gain citizenship and articulate something to someone in a way that really challenges the mythology in which the society tells itself, right? So I'm hoping that through this discussion, we'll really get to that point. So I want to bring everybody in. And when I say bring everybody in, I want folks to kind of think of this quote, but also put your thoughts in the chat, right? So people don't realize a whole man's life can be changed by one book. What does that mean to you, right? So I have like some two guided questions there. You can just put your thoughts and ideas in the chat. Please share with one another. What is a moment in your life when reading gave you clarity, courage, or comfort? Again, what is a moment in your life when reading gave you clarity, courage, or comfort? Or have you ever pushed back on a textbook, questioned a story, or reframe what you were being taught? What were those subjects? What were those ideas, right? And I really want folks to think about this, and I framed it this way, not only because 2 days ago was the centennial birthday of Malcolm X, but I also have a personal relationship with his story that I'm going to be sharing with you in a second. So I'm going to give folks the kind of an opportunity to type. I know those are large ideas and large questions, but feel free maybe to put a book that really has like that changed your life, that you've seen change other people's lives, or a book that really like caused you to get mad and do something about it and step into the world. And I hope everybody likes that meme. That's something I created back in the day for my students. Malcolm taught us, read we must. So I'll give folks an opportunity to write some thoughts in the chat. And yes, Angela's Ashes. I read that also. What a powerful book that is. Jubilee, yes. Pedagogy of the Oppressed, another classic. Soul on Ice, wow. When I Read No More Lies. Yes, all these books, right? And I'm hearing a pattern in this that really like not only push people, but also probably cause you to feel discomfort, right? And I'm specifically talking about like when I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I felt discomfort. When I read Black Boy, right, I felt discomfort and Savage Inequalities, right? So like books have the power to not only make us feel a certain way, but it also can motivate us to go out into the world and transform it. So I'm going to bring up a book that changed my life. When I was in fourth grade, I was going to a majority white school in Montgomery County in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And I used to have a stuttering problem. Um, and, I loved learning, I loved reading and everything like that at that point in fourth grade. So during one day during class, I rose my hand to answer a question, and I started stuttering. The class began to laugh at me. And the teacher's like, oh, don't mind him. His people talk like that. And I'm in fourth grade, y'all. And I've already experienced racist incidents from peers and everything like up to that point, but never from a teacher, not so explicitly, not so publicly like that. And I went home, told my parents, my mother is a Black woman from England. My father is Puerto Rican and Dominican, never taught me Spanish, so I don't know what that like, that culture is about. And I asked them and I told them about this. And obviously they got upset, contacted the school, the teacher apologized. But the librarian heard about it. The librarian at the school heard about it. This small Jewish lady. And she pulled me to the side because I was always in the library after the incident. And she's like, here, here's my here's the autobiography of Malcolm X. You ever hear of Malcolm X before? I was like, this is before the movie, y'all. I was like, I think, maybe like in a rap song or something like that, like Public Enemy, I was big on when I was in fourth grade. And she's like, I want you to have this. I think you can get something from it. And after that, in fourth grade, I read it fourth grade about three times. By fifth grade, kids in my schools were calling me Ishmael X because I would be talking about so much about what the book left with me. And it changed my whole life at that point. I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't have that experience. And I just think about how many children right now in the city of Philadelphia don't have access to a librarian in an alternative way like that gain access to this type of knowledge. So I'm going to start off with the history. Uh, this America, the United States of America, was born out of a colony established by the British. And the British went back and forth at times around what does it mean to educate uh, the enslaved population, also free blacks within their colonies. So, an Anglican mission school was created by a person named Bray. And he founded what was known as Bray schools. And in these schools, the whole purpose was actually to teach Black people literacy because he argued if they are literate in our language, then they would be obedient to their masters, right? And I have a quote right there from the school secretary to have a very good effect upon slaves' morals and make faithful and honest in their master's service. But guess what happened? As people started to be part of these schools and learn how to become literate and talk to one another, people actually found agency in a situation where they were supposed to be obedient. So people like Absalom Jones in Philadelphia was part of a Bray school and actually led a Bray school and brought people within the fold, but then it was also used as a vehicle to gain and accomplish more freedom. And the reason why I'm starting here, because even at the colonial context, this is a perfect example of even just the intention of using education and literacy as a tool of control actually became and got flipped into a tool of liberation. But, literacy was criminalized. After a while, when the United States gets formed, even beforehand, there were anti-literacy laws, right? People knew the power of being able to read and be able to challenge with the same type of veracity the justification of their own enslavement. It's no coincidence that Nat Turner was literate, very literate, right? And that was through the Bible, but it also was other stories of during enslavement where people would have secret meetings in the woods and people would, intergenerationally teach each other how to read through the dirt by using a piece of wood on the dirt to show lettering or reading out loud. David Walker's Appeal, when that became, it went through an underground network throughout the slave South. And through that, enslaved people would read it to one another. There would be like an illiterate person that would read to everybody, and everybody would gather around. Think about the power of that. Think about what that means. Even when we see the end of enslavement, right? And Black people start establishing their own schools, even their stories that the Freedmen's as they start going into the Deep South after the end of the Civil War, would actually find already established, well organized places where people and formerly enslaved people were reading to one another and having school and really thought of it as a way to move forward and part of the puzzle that needed to happen. But along with that, we also see violent backlash, not only in the former slave states, we also see violent backlashes in places like New York and Connecticut, where people would burn down schools that served Black children or schools that attempted to actually have integrated situations. So schools were used in churches, but then also people, sharecroppers, put all their resources together to make schools. But then what else happened in the South? As people started to say, well, if I'm a citizen, I should have the right to vote. And like, okay, you can vote, but you have to pass this literacy test. You have to answer these questions. And that was used as a tool of disenfranchisement, but it was also a motivator for folks to be like, I can show you, I can read, and I can interpret what you want me to interpret. So reading not only became a tool of survival, but it also became a tool of defiance. So I want to kind of share this quote, and hopefully everybody has heard of this book. If you haven't, I strongly suggest if you care about what we're talking about today, pick up this book by Dr. Jarvis Givens. Learning for African American people has been a distinct task because anti-Blackness is so endemic to the ecological context of the national educational landscape, right? That's a lot of big words to describe that the experience that Black people have in education has been fraught, but it also has been a task that people did not push to the side because it was too hard. People understood the importance of what it meant. So definitely, if you have any thoughts, please share them in the chat. Um, I definitely want folks, I wish we were in person, right? I would be asking y'all to be like, I'll be calling on people or whatever. But I want folks to really like internalize what he's trying to say, what this all means to this point. But during this period, even during the enslavement period and after, we had Black literary societies. And I know everybody in here who's an ELA person has heard of Dr. Goli Muhammad. She's my homie too, man. She great people. Like she's the real deal Holyfield, y'all. I'm not lying about that. Good person, all about the work. And in her book, Cultivating Genius, she talks about how the very foundation of her five pursuits were drawn from the Black literary tradition, where Black literary societies not only read the words in order to learn how to read, but while they were doing it, they were also kind of passing off values. They were also looking at it in different types of ways, in different lenses, applying things that were relevant to their life, basically eating the fish and spitting out the bones. And this was done purposely in order to gain a new insight to what it all means. So think about the power of that, right? Because I know for a fact that tons of schools throughout the nation have reached out to Goldie Muhammad, but also have used her book to kind of think differently about how education can be approached and literacy can be approached in their schools. And she approached it in this way. I was actually blessed to have her as a keynote speaker at one of our events once. And she even went out of her way to talk about the intellectual tradition which led her to this point, right? Because none of us get to these points in isolation. We learn from one another and we build. But that was the whole point of Black literary societies. But we also had to be honest. We also had a system of Jim Crow. And Jim Crow is usually framed in our society when it comes to schooling as an extremely negative situation. Well, very true that people got less resources. Teachers were expected to kind of regurgitate state curriculums that were inherently racist and based on white supremacist ideas. But you also had educators like Mary McLeod Bethune, Satima Clark, Anna Julia Cooper, right? Carter G. Woodson, who went out their way to establish organizations and schools and run schools that only serve primarily Black children, even with less resources. It was this expectation that everybody was in the same boat together. And that was very important that literacy, right? Like this idea that you can't read, right? That was ridiculous. Like reading was fundamental. And many of these educators within these systems, despite having hostile situations, still taught the children the truth. And when I say the truth, I mean at risk of losing their jobs. In the book Fugitive Pedagogy, Jarvis Givens talks about a teacher at the very introduction. She would have Carter G. Woodson's history book about Black history on her lap. And all the students in the class would be like at the edge of their seat learning from her talking and reading from the book. But everybody in the class knew if somebody came, an administrator, a white administrator, or a white guest, which also very much frequently came to the Jim Crow South because a lot of schools were funded through philanthropy, white philanthropy. The students knew when and how to behave when those folks came in, and the teacher had what she was supposed to teach on the desk. And they would pretend that that was going on, but in reality, the real learning was going on behind that closed door. And think about the power of that. Think about the unity. So when we look back at the Jim Crow South, yes, it is horrible that people got less resources, schools were burned down, violence monitoring, ideological policing was going on. And you will find out, I'll make that argument that's still going on today. But it's also very important to understand that people went out their way, even at risk of their livelihood, to make sure that the children learned what they needed to learn in order to build a future that they wanted to see. And that's why it's no coincidence that the civil rights movement comes out of folks in the civil rights movement come out of this tradition and talk about those schools in which they learned and the teachers that they had. Mama Satima Clark. I believe unconditionally in the ability of people to respond when they are told the truth. We need to be taught to study rather than believe, to inquire rather to affirm. Think about that. I believe unconditionally the ability of people to respond when they are told the truth. And this idea of the truth through learning and through reading, it isn't just groupthink. It isn't just like, oh, it's, you know, I'm against this, I'm against that. No, it's like, what are you for? What can we gain from, even if it's a situation that seems untenable, what can we gain in order to make our lives better for our children, but not just Black children, all children. So you need to understand, and that's why I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning when I talk about the concept of freedom, not George Washington's freedom, Harriet Tubman's. That regardless of who you are, regardless of how downtrodden you are, right? When you hear truth, I have faith that you will grab it and run with it and make it your own. That's part of that tradition. But where are we at today? In Philadelphia, 1 in 4 adults have basic literacy. That means 1 in 4 adults, 25% of adults in Philadelphia can't really read above a fourth to sixth grade level. Think about the danger of that. Think about how easy it could be. You can manipulate someone who cannot even understand what is actually being referenced when you reference something. It also mirrors the racial and economic situation that the society was built upon. It's no coincidence that you can probably overlay a map of redlining in Philadelphia and Detroit and Milwaukee and Chicago, Gary, Indiana, right? And you can lay a map over that, and I bet you the literacy rates will be lower in those areas. See, we're talking about something that just didn't happen. We're talking about an accumulation of things. Of after the civil rights movement and after the Black Power movement, there were many people in this society who were empowered, like, ooh, that's not going to happen again. You know what I mean? But then what does that mean when we find ourselves in there? You know, Philadelphia ranks at the lowest around adult reading proficiency. And I want people to sit with that. But what are the solutions that we're hearing from our educational leaders? Scripted curriculums, high-step testing, that narrow learning, that don't place it in the same tradition of asking our students to not just read the word, but understand how those words relate to their own person and the world around them, and then the science, and then the math, and then all these things. But instead, we put it into this narrow box and say, this is what they learn, and if they fail, it's them. And there's no coincidence that the lowest test scores consistently have been from people who are socially, economically isolated within this society. And unfortunately, we have a racialized layer onto that. But this is not just in Philadelphia. This is everywhere, y'all. Like in America, we have a literacy issue. And I'm talking about this is an existential issue when we have screens and constant gratification and on tap bliss all the time and not taking the patience and time to actually sit down and think and be and feel in the moment while also learning, right? And think about that. Does that sound radical? But that idea within itself, that's why the views that I'm expressing do not represent my employer. And when we talk about the indigenous, right, and Black and brown authors, they're targeting those books. Even though I would argue that beforehand, it's not like this was being taught everywhere. When I'm talking about, tell me if you ever heard of a Bray school, right? Tell me if you ever heard of Satima Clark. right? These are real things, y'all. And then just the idea that folks might be learning about this history, that might be placing it in its proper context, right? After George Floyd, there was an upsurge. We start to see a backlash within this society, where that even in over 40 states, there's examples of banning, book bannings, saying what you can and cannot read, what's not allowed and what is allowed. Without even having a real conversation about the fact that most people aren't even involved in that conversation. And then on top of everything, teachers who do go out their way to teach truth, that do go out their way to speak to the situation in which they see within their classrooms, and they care about their students, not in a missionary way, but in a way that really embraces their humanity, those teachers find themselves disproportionately and continually under threat. Just like those teachers in the Jim Crow South, just like them teachers in the Brave schools who were teaching truth even though they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to teach people to stay in their place. But you can't hold someone down once they start learning about something. You can't stop them from wanting to learn more. But when we narrow literacy to just a technical skill, just something that we check off a box, we ruin the whole point of what literacy, because you not only need to learn how to read the word, you also need to learn how to read the world. But this also reflects ongoing, continual, consistent attacks on the silencing of the Black intellectual tradition and knowledge production in communities. But what would we mean by Black literacy and the Black intellectual tradition? We have a refusal to accept the ways of knowledge in which folks are being taught that what it is. So I can tell you right now, as a teacher, those students who were in front of me in Kensington and Germantown, they knew that they were being lied to, that something was being kept away from them when we talked about things like this. And when they heard about it, they're like, why is it I'm hearing about this for the first time? I am 16, 17 years old. I've seen so much. Why am I hearing this for the first time? And I would have to say because it is. But guess what? Those students who were called bad or unable to read past a certain level, those are the students that would grab onto this and go out their way to challenge themselves to read more. Ask ask for books. Be like, I want to learn more about this. And it isn't necessarily what I even taught them. And I knew they would be learning when they came to class and be like, well, we were watching this TV show last night and relates to what we were talking about class the other day and that small little article that we had to write about something about. And this is what my aunt said, and this is what my dad said, and this is what I told them. And they were, that's when I knew students were learning. But that only happens if we put them and the tools in place and we recognize there is something deeply seated wrong within this society. We're not good. We're not headed in the right direction. And our children know it. But if we don't give them the tools to understand what that means, if we don't give them the lessons from the ancestors, the lessons that they need to know to create what needs to be happening in the present so our future does not look like where it's headed towards, then we've already lost. So when we talk about this, it is also like, yeah, it's all good that I'm learning about Greek mythology and da da da. But then if we're not placing it in a context of how people went out their way to humanize others through this, there's a long tradition of that. But not only is it political, it's spiritual work. That's why I roll my eyes all the time when people say, oh, you should be objective. Objective in what regard? Objective into the Eurocentric westernized concept of what objectivity means, which is denial of my humanity and the humanity of the students in which we serve, right? Or are we talking about something deeper? But that's when it becomes spiritual work, something that shifts the soul, right? And it's dangerous to do that in certain spaces. It's dangerous to do that when we're transmitting this to our children. And it could be dangerous. But last time I checked, I take the subway every day in Philadelphia, y'all. It is dangerous out there for them. They're not afraid anymore. And they actually we find them in a position where they're starting to challenge the challenging of what it means to challenge. So when we take the idea of literacy, right, I want to highlight this idea of a fugitive practice. right? It's refusing domination. It's reading something but taking different meanings than the meanings than which you're supposed to take from it. It's reading to remember. It's about protection and political love. When we're advancing these ideas, Black people advancing these ideas through literacy wasn't just for Black people, it was for all people. When Martin Luther King had a dream, he had a dream for everybody. You understand that? But it's usually framed in a way, oh, well, they fought for Black people. No, they fought for the soul of this society. And it's born out of the tradition in which we're talking about today. Imagination as a survival response through literacy. Think about that concept. I was part of a great session yesterday where a professor who just wrote a book about Mary McLeod Bethune was talking about how she viewed citizenship as a weapon, literacy as a weapon, not to destroy, but to build. Because every time I think about that, it's like the idea Audre Lorde talked about. Master's tools will never dismantle Master's house. We can't expect to just replace what is already there using the same thing that created what it is. We have to imagine something different. And it's also this idea of working within and against the system at the same time. It's although this is my job, I don't believe in it. I believe in our children. I believe in the ability for a better future to be made by transforming the current reality. So, what is fugitivity? It's refusal, it's resistance, it's escaping, right? In education, it's how teachers and leaders disrupt oppressive norms and create liberatory spaces. Throughout my educational career, not just within where I'm at right now, but in other places, I've noticed that there are people that are doing this that don't talk about it. The silent folks, right? The people that are doing this, but at the same time, we do need people talking about it. We do need people pushing on these systems. We do need to build community and collective spaces with one another in order for our children to actually even have the space. And I want folks to marinate on this idea. What happens when you're taught to read, but never meant to read yourself into the story? That's how a lot of our children feel. It feels so distant. It feels so isolated. What are we making happen right now that creates that situation? Because I don't blame that kid that is at a third grade reading level in high school. I blame all the teachers that allowed them to get to the place that they find themselves at now. I blame us, our society. What are we doing, y'all? So I need people to think about when you do something, it's not like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it can and it should be understood in that way because fugitivity is rejecting what we're indoctrinated with. And we really have to be honest with how our society indoctrinates us all. Dr. Naeem Akbar, great psychologist. Education was both a sacred right and a responsibility because without it, no one born into the world can become fully human. Our humanity is defined and distinguished by the development of knowledge and particularly self-knowledge. Therefore, it is critically necessary for each generation to learn who and what they are. And you can't read history at an illiterate stage, y'all. So I'm going to leave you with this. What will you protect? What will you read differently after this? Who will you teach with more truth tomorrow? What challenges are you doing? How are you challenging yourself? How are you challenging your family members? How are you challenging your friends? What are you actually doing in this moment to create a future that is much different than the direction in which we're headed in? Because it's more than talking about it, y'all. It's putting stuff at risk. If you are in a situation where you can put things at risk in order to make that happen, then I would say you need to make that happen. And I'm not saying that lightly. It's isolating, it's scary. You know, we got mouths to feed, but we are all headed wrong if we don't do something about it. If right now in this moment, it doesn't shift. So as I end, I really want to highlight next year will mark the 20-year anniversary of African American history becoming a required subject in Philadelphia, the first in the country. We're going to be having a summit, hopefully, called the Black Print 20 to celebrate that, but it's also aligned with Carter G. Woodson's 100-year anniversary. So if you're interested, the email's up there, the blackprint20@gmail.com. You can also scan the QR code and it will share this beautiful graphic made by 1838 Black Metropolis in coalition with us for the event. And first, I just want to say thank you, everybody. I know I rushed towards the end there, but I want to make sure that folks had a chance to kind of ask questions, digest. It's a lot. This slide deck will be shared with you later. You can reach me at my email at ishx12@gmail.com. If you're an Instagram user, you can follow me at ishx19. We do a lot of work. We talk about a lot of things. And I want to leave you with this quote. The past lives in your brain, in your behavior, the way you see life and the way you see yourself. Everything that happens to you in the present is filtered through past experiences present in your mind. This means the past is operationally present at every moment. If that past is distorted, if your perception of it is incorrect, if it is absent, then when you look at things in the present, your perception will be distorted. You will not be able to effectively use what you see right in front of your face. You will not be able to take advantage of the possibilities that you have, nor will you be able to design your own future because your history has been distorted. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Just from reading the comments about the presentation, a lot of folks were very interactive. I do want to acknowledge one comment that came out that this 40 to like 1 hour presentation is not enough time to cover everything. And this is really a start of a conversation. This is the start of people's learning journeys as they really dive into the subject. This was our opportunity to really open up this dialogue and to really start this conversation. It is not enough time to cover everything. I just wanted to acknowledge that first. Thank you everyone for being here. We are now opening the session to questions. I see questions coming in the chat. I do want to reiterate what we said earlier that yes, as part of my follow-up, I'm going to be sending an email out to everyone with the copy of the slide deck. So in that, you can also find the QR code and additional information and how to contact Ismael as well. I also want to recognize that the session is being recorded, and hopefully within the next week, this Lunch and Learn will be available on the Read by Fourth website, including a blog post, so you can read a little bit more and also rewatch this video or share this video with your colleagues if you want to encourage conversations happening in your workplace, with your community, and so on. One question that I wanted to call out first was if you can give us answers on how we should proceed.
I mean, wow. We need it all, right? There's different roles for different folks, man. It's kind of like leaning into your strengths, acknowledging your positionality, while still at the same time being unapologetic about what it means to educate children, right? And I try to emphasize that even though we're talking about the Black literary tradition, right, the Black intellectual tradition, this is a very humanizing concept that should be applied to all children, regardless of their racial identity. That should be thought about in a way that's much deeper than just the surface level in which it's presented to us, right? And that's just another example of how things are boxed in a certain way. So I would argue break out them boxes. Don't be afraid to embrace ideas that might seem radical, right? Or whatever that means, right? And just recognize like it ain't all good. So what are you doing? So once you have that question, I think you're already headed on to the right direction.
All right, the next question is, I think you answered this a little bit, but I also want to give you another chance of how do we get started?
Well, I wish I had a checklist about that. I'd probably be a millionaire or something like that right now. I would say start that with that right there. pick up fugitive pedagogy, right? If you heard a name that I mentioned in this or a concept that you never heard about, Google it, right? We have the world at our fingertips. Never in the history of man, right? Or man and woman, have we been able to access this level of information at the tip of our fingertips, right? What are you using that information for and on? And also be very critical of even what I just said, right? How do you know I just told you the truth? How do you know I'm not lying to you? And if you can't answer that, you should be worried.
How can the science of reading uphold lessons from this tradition?
It's kind of the science of reading is just how people learn, right? Um, I would say that that's what this is all about. Like what they did in those Black literary societies of looking at text and looking at different things. Like I I was at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and they would show folks like artifacts that they had from the past of when people who escaped enslavement or just came to Philadelphia and never learned how to read no matter age, they would have these copying of how to write. And what they were copying were different value ideas. Like, not just like God is good, but like, I'm capable, I am able, I am, you know what I mean? So like not only were they learning how to read and write, they were learning how to think. And that's what we need to understand. Like, don't allow this to become another type of packaged product that you buy from a multi-million, corporation. Understand what we're talking about is just a simple thing of being present while also reading with one another and speaking about it.
And in order to continue our learning journey, what are any books that you would recommend that we read, or like either resources that we should tap into to continue this conversation?
Well, definitely fugitive pedagogy. I would also suggest The Lost Education of Horace Tate. We actually just did a book club about that. Wonderful book. It even goes over the fact that, teachers in Georgia, Black teachers in Georgia, put their careers in line, but single-handedly almost kept up the NAACP's presence in Georgia during the 1950s, which blew my mind when I first read it. I would also suggest James Anderson, Education of Blacks in the South, another classic book. I would also suggest Amos Wilson's The Falsification of African Consciousness, kind of how history is displayed to us in a way that really like makes it irrelevant. Um, and there's tons of articles. LeGarrette King's work on racial literacy. If you're not familiar with LeGarrette King's work on racial literacy, you can Google it and it will come right up. He's doing wonderful work thinking through the importance and the danger of not being exposed to those type of ideas. And I think those are good starts.
If you had one message to Philly families about reading and literacy, what would it be?
Do it. Go out your way, put on the subtitles on the TV. Um, you know, Pick up something that your child finds interesting and then talk to them about that as you read it together. That's what my mother did with me. I wouldn't have been able to read Malcolm X by myself for the first time in fourth grade. Like, but I did. I read it. And then after that, I was reading everything by myself. I was at a college level by fifth grade, and that was just because I was going through this process. So, like, even my 10-year-old son right now, he loves comics. So I go out my way. I'm like, here, you want this thick, like 1,000-page comic? And I'll buy you another one when you're done. My wife gets a little upset. But this boy, now at 10 years old, is reading things and then able to talk to me about it. And then we're watching shows together and we're talking about what that means and why it's entertaining and what might be problematic.
Right. And I recognize that there are more questions in the chat. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them for time, but I do have them recorded and I will be able to ask them and send them out in a follow-up email as well. But I did want to ask one more question. Is there really a quote unquote we?
Ah, I mean, that's a question I wrestle with. Um, I think yes, in the sense of humanity, I would say that there's a lot of mirages and camouflages that make it hard for people to acknowledge that, which makes it difficult for people who want we uh, to actually make it happen. Um, but like one thing I always say, if you don't know about all the factors, all the ideas that were discussed in this right now, I would argue that how can you be a good person in this society? How can you actually not be resist the indoctrination of anti-blackness, the indoctrination of patriarchy, the indoctrination of like the great white narrative of civilization, right? If you don't know these things and you're indoctrinated with these other ideas, like how can you tell the difference between what's true and what's not true?
And that's the last question I'm going to be able to pull from the chat. And I wanted to pass it over to Gigi to ask her question as well.
I just want to say, first of all, that was great. Thank you so much. Every time I sit down with you, I'm taking notes and writing things. And then yesterday we had me and you had a little chat and stuff. And my question to you is, because if we look at Malcolm, we look at Martin, we look at like all these like superheroes, because they were liberators, right? A lot of times they were hated. So my question to you is like, how do you continue to be a truth bearer in this in education?
Well, I just want to reiterate that the views that I express do not reflect my employer. Um, it's isolating. It's not easy, right? Um, the thing that motivates me is seeing my former students on the subway. What motivates me are my children and seeing what they are processing in the moment that we find ourselves in right now and how they want to see something different, how they are making things different. Um, Another thing that motivated me, I mentioned this at the beginning before we started. I received a text message from a professor friend, and she said that like she shared an article I recently wrote, and then with her mentee in Nigeria, and he shared it with 500 folks on a WhatsApp chat that he's a part of, and that not only did he share that, but he also shared the PDFs books of all the books that I suggested to read about Malcolm X. And I just think about like, what does that mean? Those ripple effects, right? And so like, I think we need to be motivated more by belief and values and doing what's right by humanity than what's safe, what is going to be the easiest and the path of least resistance. But that I'm not saying it's going to be a crystal stair. But the more of us that do that, the more of the folks that feel that they're good people, that feel like they want to see something different, the more of us that gather together, the more stronger we become. And then also the folks who ain't about that life start exposing themselves. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Thank you. And just another comment that I've been seeing that people loved the transparency in your answers and the thought you put into them as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. So much love in the chat. I'm going to do my best to also get you all the comments, as you won't be able to read them all in this moment. Thank you everyone for being here. You can expect an email from me in a few days with the recording and the blog post. I appreciate everyone. Thank you again to Ismael. Thank you so much for all the time you took to prepare this and taking time to really talk to us and start this conversation. We appreciate you and thank you all for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.